biggest kicker is having tools that don't have many false positives. And we just don't have time as high velocity organizations to deal with triaging tens of thousands of issues, right? So I rely a lot on the accuracy of the tools. And again, the tools are getting better and more mature and faster.
Hi, you're listening to The Secure Developer. It's part of the DevSecOn community, a platform for developers, operators, and security people to share their views and practices on DevSecOps, Dev and Sec collaboration, cloud security, and more. Check out devsecon.com to join the community and find other great resources. This podcast is sponsored by Snyk. Snyk is a dev-first security company, helping companies fix vulnerabilities in their open source components and containers without slowing down development. To learn more, visit snyk.io. SNYK.io. On today's episode, Guy Podjarny, founder of Snyk, talks to DJ Schleen, Vice President of Infrastructure and Developer Operations at VillageMD. DJ is a DevOps practitioner and security advocate in the healthcare industry and provides thought leadership to organizations looking to integrate security into their DevOps practices. He comes from a practitioner background and specializes in building progressive application security programs, automating security in DevOps environments, and breaking down organizational silos that inhibit the delivery of safer software. We hope you enjoy their conversation. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Secure Developer. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, we're going to talk about the sort of broad state of software security, maybe slightly crappy state of software security. And to do that, we have a software connoisseur here with us and very experienced in DJ Schleen, who is the VP of Infrastructure and Developer Operations at VillageMD. DJ, thanks for coming on the show. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Definitely great to be here. I know we've had some stops and starts schedule-wise, but busyness and lulls come into play, and here we are, right?
Yeah. Awesome. We're here to share some of the views. So DJ, you've had a whole, a rich history here, kind of going in and out of dev and security and vendors and suppliers. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got into it. How do you get into security? Maybe a bit of a brief tale of the journey to here.
Oh, man. The tale goes a long way back, and I won't go too far back with the years because that'll date me. But back when computers just started coming out and the internet first started surfacing, I was pretty interested in how everything worked. So, the whole hacker right to tinker came into play. And, security wasn't something that anyone really thought about, although there was none. It was pretty easy to get into websites and, do some crazy things and get free phone calls and all that kind of stuff. Started off as a hacker and eventually got into web design and formed one of the first web design companies in Canada back in the 90s. And that sort of brought in a big influx of software development history in my career. Security was, again, nothing that was a career-oriented thing at the time, right? We were just developing software, pushing it out as fast as we could, and putting this little word in Visual Basic Code, like this phrase, on error, resume next, right? So I think that was the motto of the 80s and 90s. But, fast forward to what I've been doing in the past couple of years. I've been heavily involved in DevOps since we first started realizing that what we were doing was DevOps. My career brought me into the healthcare industry where I was security architect over at Aetna CVS, so deep into the healthcare industry. And that's when I really started getting into the security aspect. I joined Aetna after doing a lot of ethical hacking and breaking and entering into buildings and red teaming. So there was the hacker came back, and then I realized that security could be a career. So joined Aetna CVS, joined United Healthcare and the company called Rally over there. And now I found myself at VillageMD. I started off here as a DevSecOps director. And after months of convincing that we had to break down silos, I'm the VP of Infrastructure and Developer Operations. And we are responsible for DevOps, cloud technologies, SRE group, DBA, network, physical network, and voice. So lots of changes that happen, but bringing infrastructure together and what we do from a DevOps perspective, it's sort of come full circle and Now we're just DevOps.
And this includes, though, like the security component is still a part of it. It's a blend of the security aspects of DevOps, of that platform, of that infrastructure, as well as the non-security attributes of it.
Yeah, absolutely. DevSecOps as a term, I evangelized it quite a bit, both when I was working at Aetna and then when I was in the vendor space. And one of the descriptions or the definitions of DevSecOps is that security is everyone's responsibility. So by defining that statement, it really makes the term DevSecOps irrelevant. So one of the things that I really wanted to do was break down the silo. And one of the things I noticed was, the past couple of organizations I've been at, we ended up having a DevSecOps group, which basically just AppSec turning into DevSecOps. And then we had a DevOps group. Nobody talked to each other. And we were back in the same situation that we were 10 years ago, where people started saying, hey, communication and collaboration and flow, feedback, and experimentation have to come into play. So that's why I destroyed the silo of DevSecOps, and security is just embedded in everything we do. You can call it DevSecOps, DevOps, Rainbow Monkey, Unicorn Pony, whatever you want, right? But it's programming, it's development, and security has to be an integral part of that, or else it's not a quality piece of software you're providing, right?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I remember, I guess the same thing happened and it still is happening in DevOps teams, which is you have DevOps, which is all about breaking the silos, and yet you have DevOps teams. The intent is positive. It's around saying it's a dev-oriented ops team. It's a modern approach, or they take a different philosophy than maybe an IT ops. But it's interesting to see this in DevSecOps as well, and definitely see that title kind of creeping up, sometimes with the proper maybe mentality behind it, and sometimes just because it's a catchier, newer thing. But if you don't blend it together,
people got behind it. One of the things that I like to think about is in DevOps, we create the highway that developers and engineers deploy their code on, right? So we control the guardrails, which is the security, the asphalt, the route and where things go, which is our pipelines. We have speed checks all along the way just to make sure that things are going right. Got the unlimited speed in some places hovering over the road, but security being part of that, we provide the route for people to deploy safer software sooner. So DevOps teams versus DevOps embedded into teams. I think both work, and the bigger the company, the more you start ending up having that DevSecOps, DevOps focused team, right?
Yeah, I like that analogy. Like when it's sort of it's a slight abuse of the paved road, but I actually think it really holds in terms of saying, you pave the road, but you also put the guardrails, you also put the conditions. So
and the engineers are the ones who are driving whatever car they want. They can make a Porsche, they can drive one of those, they can drive a Fiat, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that, and you're running the sort of broader infrastructure team. So let's dig into the meat of it a little bit. You've had these different perspectives. You sort of slightly glossed over, I think, the fact that I think a couple of times you're in sort of software vendors, right? Providing tooling for it. How do you think we're doing on this journey? We're building out these tools. You've consumed them. You've evangelized them. I guess when you look at the state of indeed the security industry, the software security industry, what's the score? What do you say is our current state?
Well, it depends on where you are. I guess. I think in the overall industry state, in the tooling, we're there, right? We're getting there. We're in the A's and B's, right? 10 years ago when DevOps started coming around, there was really no good pipeline related tools, CI/CD tools. People had to cobble together things. I remember at Aetna, we built our own deployment pipelines and built it on some open source software. And we cobbled together things to try to make this a reality. When it comes to security tools, DevSecOps, 6-7 years old, maybe. There hasn't been many tools, right? We started looking, and tools being the implementation of good technique and good people, right? People, process, and then tooling. But the tools never caught up, or finally are catching up, sorry. Looking at some of the traditional security scanning tools 6 years ago, you might as well watch paint dry. I remember a time when I was in architecture class in Ottawa. I'm a historical building architect by education. We would draw a building, we'd bring it to the plotter, and we would wait probably a good hour for that thing to come out, right? And this is where the static analysis tools and all these tools were back in the day. And I've always said that anything less than 2 minutes is where we want to be from a scanning perspective. And now we're down in milliseconds and seconds in some places with some of the toolings coming out. So I think tooling wise, we're getting there. I think implementation of tool wise, I think we're as a whole in society as general, D and C. I don't think security is still taken seriously by a lot of organizations. It's something that people know they have to do, but there's always a priority and always an excuse not to do something like this, right? Security wise.
So all in all, you're sort of describing not a terrible state in terms of the tools or the arsenal that is at our disposal. If you think about this challenge, and whether it's in VillageMD where you're today, or in past companies, how do you battle that? If the tools exist in the ecosystem, but the team is not embracing it correctly, what can be done?
Well, we tried it a couple of different ways in the past. One is like the command from up high on top of the security mountain, thou shalt put all this security tooling in place. That was the sort of 5 years ago type of approach to it, where we have these tools, we put them in. It's the Phoenix project completely in reality, right? Where people start yanking tools out, security ends up breaking builds or breaking systems. The communication's not there. It just, so that was one way that I tried to implement it and it didn't work. So epic failure of DevSecOps there. Now I look at it more of an engineering first approach where you almost have to make security invisible. Not saying that it's not there, but keeping it right in the developer's area and their line of sight. So it's an integral part of what they do. And really you treat it as an attribute of quality. So, quality infrastructure code, quality application code, quality SQL code, whatever it is. And quality being linting or, complexity, KPIs, and then the security of it as well. Also treating any kind of security vulnerability as just a work item or a task, right? So for example, in our backlogs or in our tracking systems, we have epic and task. We don't track bugs. We don't track vulnerabilities. It's something you have to do in a collection of things. So we really try to get essential on it and really simplify things. So a couple different ways. I think the engineering first approach is really hitting. It starts resonating with people. We're going to continue to expand on and work on, see what the results are with that.
So I like the kind of a simulated approach of having the tasks be along with the rest of them. Oftentimes, one of the challenges is prioritizing it. Fine, it's on the same backlog, but there's nothing really that I feel I'm getting when I actually take that task on versus that product capability there that if I did, there will be upside. How do you battle that?
So there's, going back to my ITIL roots, you have impact and severity, right? And so you have that matrix. And then if you add likelihood into it, things start sorting a little bit different in your backlog. So likelihood of an impact to the business or likelihood of breach or attack or something to that effect, right? So you can use it as a magnifier or a minifier, really, when it comes to your impact and severity matrix. You're right on there when it comes to security being a non-functional attribute sometimes. But again, it's like a quality attribute. So developers are technical artists, right? And they love creating things. And we have to make it part of the paint, right? It has to be an ingredient of the paint that they use. So they can paint whatever picture they want, but there's this resilience, security resilience that's baked into the paint, right? Just as an analogy. But again, it's a cultural thing where you treat function and non-functional requirements as equals. The business is always going to convince you to say, prioritize feature over that. And security is always going to press you on the other side and say, hey, we have unpatched servers, or we have, these vulnerabilities in our code. It's a delicate balancing act. That's one of the reasons I pulled all of these disparate teams together, so that we can really have a consistent way of dealing with security across all of our infrastructure, code, and otherwise.
What's the scale that the team operates in today? Like VillageMD what's the rough team sizes there on the engineering and security side?
Oh, man. Just to put this into perspective, last October, I think we had 1,500 employees, like physicians, as well as IT and business. Now I think we're up over 3,500, almost 4,000. Next year, we'll probably be around 10. So things exponentially or, sort of grow infrastructure wise with that. Right now, I'm seriously trying to expand the team and, hiring some senior and junior folks in the DevOps and DevSecOps kind of fields. I think that's one of the struggles is trying to keep up with the growth. I guess probably in my organization, there's upwards of 30, 40 people. I believe that innovation is something that can help mitigate some growing pains of growth. Again, keeping up with the business needs and the acquisition of clinics and what we're doing, putting stores or clinics into Walgreens over the next couple of years. It's daunting. It's definitely daunting. But security wise, we do have a GRC team and AppSec is rolled into what I'm doing now. We also have our SOC. So it's quite a big organization just with the security and infrastructure teams. And then we have the engineering teams as well. So I couldn't put a finger on exactly how many people, but there's quite a few.
Yeah, but it's a good size. Yeah, good size and it's growing. So I guess back to your previous point on thinking about these issues as any that they are, and the business might be pulling naturally towards more functional capabilities versus the security. How do you track this? How do you know that you're not falling behind, the teams are not overly lured into that sort of business bias? Especially if you're saying that it's in the backlog and people just need to track it. Do you try to budget it? Is there a measurement or sort of KPI that you expose the team to? How do you keep everybody, even kind of for their own good, how do you keep everybody honest and on path?
Well, there's a couple things there. One is the way I think there's 24 hours in a day, 8 hours has to be for work, 8 hours sleep, and 8 hours play. And if there's any imbalance in that, something suffers, right? And so there has to be a balance in life. The second part of that is people need to work 36 hours a week, and then 4 hours has to be for experimentation. So 10%. That goes to my grandmother's saying that 10% of every dollar you make is yours to keep. It's the same with time, right? And that has to be experimentation time. And that's the true essence of where you want to be with DevOps. Now, that leads into a couple of philosophies, I believe. One's essentialism, which is the relentless pursuit of less and the ability to choose what is essential to do versus what is can be delayed or put off. Effortlessness, which is when everything becomes essential, how do you make it effortless? Which is, in my opinion, automation and good process and procedures. And then the law of subtraction. So taking away time to make people more innovative with the time they use. And having those cultural changes is really difficult because people think, hey, I have to work 40 hours a week and there's so much I have to do. But, you start taking away time and then people start valuing that time of improvement and it helps with the rest and they make sure that they balance. Now, from a tracking work perspective, getting back to your question, we do 1 week sprints. And the reason being is if, everything's always priority, we have to do it now. We have to do it now, right? No matter where it comes from. If we do a week sprint, we can say to people like, what's the priority and engage the importance of it. So, if it's an all hands on deck, 5-alarm fire, yeah, we'll do it now, right? And we'll move work around. But 9 times out of 10, when you ask somebody if we could plan it into next week's sprint or, or after, they say yes. So really what we're doing is we're protecting the work streams of our developer by ensuring that we're really managing the work that's coming in and then prioritizing at the same time. Some of the ways that we manage that work too is we'll have one planning session or stand up on Monday to plan out the week, figure out what's in that sprint. And then we do all of our stand-ups daily inside of messaging platforms like Teams or Slack, because we don't want to have people join a 10-minute meeting and then have 20 minutes of re-engagement time where they're trying to figure out, okay, what was I working on before this? So it's really protection of time for people, the ability to self-organize, understand the work that they have, manage the work that's coming in because there's always a ton of it, and then prioritizing things, whether the security or not.
Yeah. I think you're very consistent here with sort of the security is just an aspect of all these other work. You just sort of build it. One of my challenges that I sort of oftentimes relate to around security is that it is invisible, but not in the good sense in that it's done and it's invisible, but rather that it's invisible when you don't do it.
Yep.
So within that, what's an alarming threshold? Like in any one of these given sprints, you have a certain amount of security backlog, typically more than you really are able to do indeed. What's minimum? Maybe the right way to ask it is like, what KPIs are you using to track how you're doing as far as security goes?
So there's a few things we do from a security perspective. We rely heavily on our tools to tell us how many vulnerabilities we have, what the severities are, and not just vulnerabilities in infrastructure code, but also the configuration. So as we start looking at our Kubernetes clusters or cloud environments, hardening those systems, and then we track those over time. So we want to see a consistent trend downwards on the vulnerabilities that we have. One of the things I like using are Shewhart graphs or quality control charts, where, for example, we implemented, Sneak, one of my last companies, and we noticed that we had 10,000 vulnerabilities. I'm just picking a number here. And then as we started remediating these, we wrote a couple of different add-ins for GitHub where we would auto-create Jira tickets that would mirror the pull requests and the vulnerabilities that were found. And then when the pull request or the vulnerability was gone, the ticket would auto-close. So we had those zero-touch kind of tickets that would just fall off the backlog. But, from a quality perspective, you're never going to have zero, right? And I think that's where we have to, as an industry, accept the fact that vulnerabilities are only as good as your last scan. So you have to continuously scan for security vulnerabilities, and that's really continuous quality monitoring. So in an upper control limit, lower control limit, you figure those out. And as soon as you start getting up above that boundary, then you know that we have to pay more attention to vulnerability remediation. So that might go into a certain sprint as a sprint theme. If you're under that lower control limit, then you're in a good place, right? So, it's really knowing the range of what normal is and keeping everything in that range and relying on the tools to tell us that, but then relying on the KPIs and the metrics and the graphs and to help us, feedback and the prioritization of how we address some of these issues.
Yeah, I think it sounds like there's heavy emphasis in sort of doing better than we did yesterday, kind of have the graph trend in the right direction.
Yep.
So you're not accumulating, you'll get to a good place. That plus a correct sorting algorithm, as you pointed out before as well, around likelihood and other parameters to bump the right items to the top of the list.
Yeah, the biggest kicker is having tools that don't have many false positives. We just don't have time as high velocity organizations to deal with triaging tens of thousands of issues, right? So I rely a lot on the accuracy of the tools. And again, the tools are getting better and more mature and faster. And when it comes to security, again, it's the reasonable level of effort to secure your systems, right? So if you look at compliance requirements, people say, I'm not really sure exactly which ones, but there's two that most of these compliance requirements have, which is SAST and DAST. Okay, where's your risk in that? And, as we mentioned, I was at a vendor, we were doing software supply chain things, and we found that 3 to 15% of any code is developed by the company that's developed. 85 to 97% is all open source components. So where's your risk if you're using SAST, right? So this is where we have to use a combination of tools that are really fast to try to identify these things. And if there are fixes and binary compatible fixes, implement them. It's almost like a zero touch, easy thing for engineers to do. But yeah, I digress there.
Yeah, no, but it's important. So that's actually like a great sort of two tools related questions for you. One is maybe it's not tools, but rather risks. What's top of mind for you right now as you think maybe it's about yourself, but also as an industry? What would you say are the security concerns that people should be most mindful of in this context of application, product, security, DevSecOps world?
Well, I think the biggest one I'm concerned with right now is infrastructure as code and checking for security issues or configuration issues and errors, right? As people start implementing, everyone's going to Kubernetes, right? The buzzword of the day. and it's an actual wonderful tool, but a fool with a tool remains a fool, right? Buckminster Fuller said back in the past that statement. So really need to make sure that our perimeters are known, that they're configured properly. And that's just, again, that's a part of the security picture, right? Like if we're looking at unpatched servers or configuration, some of those external controls that we have could be a compensating control for an application vulnerability, right? But again, application vulnerabilities are still part of that. With the supply chain software scanning that we got now, the ability to find and remediate vulnerabilities, or at least know an upgrade path to get to a cleaner and higher quality component, we have the technology to do that. We have static analysis testing tools that can look at what the 3 to 15% of our code is, and search really fast through that and look through the deltas. And, no longer are we waiting 2 hours around it, but the infrastructure as code domain is still fairly new. And that concerns me. And part of it's continuous policy enforcement, configuration checking, but it's also, you start getting into continuous verification, which is, do our systems work as they're expected to work? So that's the next on my horizon is, how do we ensure that our systems are operating how they should be? But the current problem for me is how do we ensure that things are configured like they should be? So yeah, that's, I think, from a tool perspective, where I see, at least in my current state, where we need to be. If someone's just starting with security and DevSecOps or DevOps with security added and sprinkled in, or whatever you want to call it, your biggest risk is going to be around the software supply chain, because you have no idea what's coming into your systems. And the dependencies of those dependencies can cause issues. A quick anecdote about that. I wrote an article once that was 0 + 2 = 154. And adding two components or two little import statements into a Go application brought in 154 subdependencies. And, of that, 9 were vulnerable. So it's understanding the things that we don't know, I think, is the problem right there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love the catchy title there. The problem is one well familiar with, clearly. So I guess before my closing question to ask, so you talk about tools evolving. You mentioned a few attributes of them, which are sort of accuracy and speed. What else is on your list when you're talking about a tool needing to be fit for purpose to work in this high velocity surrounding that you work in?
And that's, I think, it gets back to the engineering first approach. I think the security organization is going to look into the UI, right? They're going to find out some information, aggregate data, that kind of thing, getting KPIs and the metrics out of it. But for the tools to really be successful, it's integrating into Git, where people are working, for example, right? GitHub, and having all the information there. So if a vulnerability is detected in a third-party component and it can be fixed, it's just sitting there waiting for a pull request approval, right? And then that can go through your existing workflows for that system. And even if you can't remediate it, potentially having that there as well and saying, this pull request is broken because it won't actually work, but this is what you have to do, right? So developers tend to work better there, or, creating some tickets that reflect it, but low impact, low touch, right? Accurate things, ease of remediation, if they can be remediated. Even correcting code, like if you might have a regex in your code that doesn't doesn't catch something. Having the tool say, hey, this regex is wrong, and this is what you have to do if this is your intent, right? Like sort of intelligent tooling, not to the point where it's AI, but things that actually detect quality, right? So, security being an attribute of quality for me, I think that's really important, is to keep it in that quality in almost the QA checks of build process, right? So I think that's where I think that they're going to be most successful is, the IDE is nice, the web interface is nice, but when it comes to being really effective, there's nothing like a command line or a pull request, right?
Kind of being well integrated in. I love the consistent, again, analogies to think about this as an aspect of quality, think about it as a tool of software. This has been great, DJ. Also some other questions to ask, but I think we're kind of at time. So before I let you go here, one question I like to ask every guest coming on the show. So if you had your crystal ball out, if you kind of take it out and you think 5 years out at someone sitting at your shoes, not necessarily at VillageMD, but other, in this type of role, what do you think would be most different about their reality?
Ooh, that's a deep question. I think the reality, if I could look into a crystal ball, would be that they have a single view of the overall security and quality state of their applications as they deploy, right? So, the utopia for me is to get to a point where, system gets deployed, which has multiple microservices, UI, data, whatever it is, and have a holistic view of all the vulnerabilities or all the issues that could be around supply chain, code quality, infrastructure as code configuration information, like all in one. So I think 5 years from now, I think we're going to get to that. I think that's where things are starting to go, or where the business is looking at, I want a number. I want to know what my risk is for this app, right? Because everything, again, it comes back to, you start looking at, gosh, I have some certification books here. This Certified Information Security Manager. It's great. It doesn't talk about software. So, it's fantastic. We can track like locks on doors and stuff like that, but there's nothing in there about actual software. So if we take the risk from there, we can start running it through our risk calculations and really getting an idea of what our risk exposure is for our organization from a monetary perspective or, non-monetary or legal perspective, compliance, right? I think people won't have a problem getting to that information.
I think that's a great optimistic kind of a crystal ball.
I'd love to see it.
I'm with you. I relate to it. I hope it happens.
Well, I'm going to make sure it happens for us. And talking with people in the industry that are building tools and just seeing the amazing creativity that they come up with to solve some of these issues that we never even knew we had. I think that we're just going to have safer software. I hope that the tables turn a little bit on the attackers where we're not reactive anymore, that we're more proactive to security and the results show.
Yeah, no, well, definitely the only path to go, really, the only way to kind of reach security.
Yeah.
DJ, this has been great. If people want to bug you on the sort of the internets, how can they find you?
LinkedIn, DJ Schleen, Twitter @DJ Schleen. If you want to look at some cool code snippets, we got some interesting stuff coming for Sneak in the future, doing some pre-commit hooks. DevOps Kung Fu, DKFM. We're on github.com/devops-kung-fu, and you can check out some of our stuff there. But definitely feel free to reach out to me if anyone has any questions or just to connect on LinkedIn. Always willing to socialize and see what the industry is up to.
Excellent. Or maybe try to find a job in that expanding team.
Oh man, yeah. I'm definitely looking for some people that really want to change the world, work hard, play hard, and just grow in a rapidly growing industry and in the company that we're in, and really solve problems in a holistic vision where security is just an attribute of quality.
Indeed. Cool. Thanks, DJ. Thanks for joining on, and thanks everybody for tuning in. And I hope you join us for the next one.
I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to The Secure Developer. That's all we have time for today. To find additional episodes and full transcriptions, visit thesecuredeveloper.com. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved in the community, find us on Twitter at @DevSecCon. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you enjoyed today's episode. Bye for now.